She decided to break every rule of her profession and claim me exactly when the night shift janitor was vacuuming the hallway just 3 feet away, separated from us only by a sheet of frosted glass that turned our bodies into suspicious, blurring silhouettes. I will never forget the sound of the thunder rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows of the sanctuary yoga studio, or the way the heavy, humid scent of sandalwood mixed with the ozone of the storm, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a place of healing and more like a trap. It was late, past 10 in the evening, and the city outside was drowning in a torrential downpour that turned the streets into rivers of black oil. I was Liam, a 24-year-old former track star whose career had been shattered by a herniated disc, leaving me desperate, broken, and willing to try anything to stop the pain. She was Serena, the 38-year-old owner of the most exclusive studio in the city, a woman who preached detachment and spiritual purity during the day, but who was currently looking at me with eyes that held zero zen and a terrifying amount of hunger. I was the last client of the day. The studio was empty, save for the flickering candlelight that cast long, dancing shadows against the mirrored walls. "Your lower back is a fortress, Liam," she murmured, circling my mat like a shark in quiet water. "You're holding on to trauma. You're blocking the flow. We need to force it open." I was in child's pose, my forehead pressed against the cork mat, my knees wide, my arms stretched out in front of me. It is a posture of surrender, of total vulnerability, where you cannot see what is happening behind you. You can only feel. I heard the soft slap of her bare feet on the hardwood floor as she moved behind me. I expected her hands, her strong, capable instructor's hands, to press into my lumbar spine as she had done a dozen times before. But she didn't use her hands. I felt a shift in the air pressure, a sudden proximity of heat, and then the shocking, undeniable weight of her body. Serena didn't just adjust me. She straddled me. She lowered herself onto my lower back, her hips settling into the curve of my spine, pinning me to the floor. The air left my lungs in a sharp gasp that was half pain, half shock. This wasn't in the manual. This wasn't therapy. This was domination. "Breathe," she commanded, her voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated through my ribcage. "Do not fight the weight. Accept it." I tried to lift my head, to question her, but she placed a hand firmly on the back of my neck, pushing my face back into the mat. "Stay down," she hissed. "You came to me to be fixed. So let me fix you." The sensation was overwhelming. Her weight was heavy, grounding, and incredibly intimate. I could feel the heat of her thighs pressing against my sides through the thin fabric of my workout gear. I could feel the slow, rhythmic movement of her hips as she adjusted her seat, grinding down into my sore muscles with a precision that was agonizingly pleasurable. It was a violation of every professional boundary, yet I didn't push her off. I couldn't. My body, betrayed by months of celibacy and pain, was reacting to her proximity with a traitorous arousal that I prayed she couldn't feel, though given our position, she undoubtedly could. Then, the outside world intruded. The dull roar of a vacuum cleaner started up in the hallway. Through the sliver of my peripheral vision, I saw the shadow of Carlos, the cleaner, moving behind the frosted glass door. He was close. If he looked through the glass, he wouldn't see a therapeutic adjustment. He would see a woman riding a man on the floor of a dark studio. "Serena!" I choked out into the mat, panic rising in my throat. "Carlos, he's right there. He can see us." She didn't freeze. She didn't scramble off me. Instead, she leaned forward, her body covering mine completely, her chest pressing against my back. She brought her lips so close to my ear that her breath felt like steam. "Let him see," she whispered, her teeth grazing my earlobe. "He sees what he wants to see. He sees a teacher helping a student. Or maybe—" She paused, her hand sliding from my neck down to my tricep, gripping the muscle tight. "Maybe he sees exactly what we are doing, and he's enjoying the show." The vacuum cleaner bumped against the glass door with a loud thud. I flinched. My phone, lying on the floor next to the mat, suddenly lit up with a call from my mother, buzzing angrily against the wood. The light from the screen illuminated Serena's face for a split second. Her eyes were closed, her head thrown back, an expression of focused ecstasy on her face. She wasn't worried about discovery. She was feeding on the risk. "Ignore it," she ordered, reaching out with one hand. I thought she was going to silence the phone. Instead, she reached for the remote control of the studio's lighting system that lay near my head. With a decisive click, she killed the dimmer switch. The last of the overhead recessed lights died, plunging us into a darkness broken only by the flickering candles and the lightning flashes from the storm outside. The vacuum cleaner stopped. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and thick. I held my breath. Was Carlos coming in? Had he seen enough to call security? Or worse, call her husband, Greg? Carlos! Serena called out, her voice projecting clearly toward the door, steady and authoritative, even though she was still sitting on top of me, her weight pinning me to the earth. We are finished with the main lights. You can go. Do not disturb the final meditation. There was a pause, a heartbeat of terror. Then, a muffled voice from the hallway. See, Miss Serena. Good night. The shadow moved away. The footsteps faded. We were alone. I exhaled, my body sagging with relief, expecting her to finally get off. She didn't move. She leaned down again, her hair falling like a curtain around my face, creating a private, scented world where only the two of us existed. Now, she whispered, her hands sliding under my shirt, touching bare skin for the first time. The audience is gone. The lights are out. And you are still so tense, Liam. This pose, it requires full contact. The darkness of the studio wasn't a void. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from the scent of burning sage, the metallic tang of the storm, and the overwhelming, electric proximity of Serena. She didn't let me linger in the safety of child's pose. With a grip that was shockingly strong, she grabbed my shoulder and flipped me over, my back hitting the cork mat with a dull thud. I lay there, supine and exposed, staring up into the shadows where her face hovered like a beautiful, dangerous moon. The transition from therapeutic adjustment to something entirely different had happened so seamlessly that my brain was still scrambling to catch up with my body. Your spine is aligned, she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual professional detachment. But your energy, it's completely blocked. You're holding onto tension in your root chakra. Do you know where that is, Liam? She didn't wait for an answer. She moved. In one fluid motion, she shifted from my side to straddle my hips, her knees planting firmly on the mat on either side of my waist. The weight of her body settled onto my pelvis, grounding me, trapping me. The friction of her yoga leggings against my thighs sent a jolt of heat straight to my core that shattered my last line of defense. This was no longer yoga. This was a siege. I tried to speak, to ask what the hell was happening, but my throat was dry as dust. Serena, is this standard protocol? I managed to croak, my hands hovering uncertainly over the floor, unsure whether to push her off or pull her closer. She laughed, a low, throaty sound that vibrated through her chest and into mine. Protocol is for beginners, she murmured. Healing requires intuition. She reached into the neckline of her top and pulled out a long silver chain with a heavy, jagged quartz crystal at the end. She began to swing it slowly over my chest, the pendulum moving in hypnotic circles. The crystal is cold, she noted, watching it swing. But you are burning up. She let the crystal drop. It hit the center of my chest, a shocking, icy point of contact against my feverish skin, and then she dragged it slowly, agonizingly, down the center line of my body, over my stomach, toward the waistband of my shorts. The blockage is here, she whispered. Her hand followed the path of the stone, her fingers tracing the inner line of my thigh, inching dangerously close to the center of the heat. We need to release it. We need to drain the poison. The air in the room was so thick I felt like I was drowning. Her fingers were confident, exploring territory that was strictly forbidden, erasing the line between instructor and student with every millimeter. I arched my back, a reflex I couldn't control, a silent plea for her to continue. She leaned forward, her hair brushing my face, her lips parting to kiss me, to seal the pact we were making in the dark. And then, the world shattered. BZZZZT. The electronic buzzer of the studio's front door tore through the silence like a scream. It was loud, harsh, and insistent. I froze instantly, my muscles locking up. Serena stopped, her hand hovering just inches from the blockage she was about to address. We both turned our heads toward the front of the studio. Through the partition of bamboo plants and the darkness, we could see the outline of the glass storefront illuminated by streetlights. A figure was standing there. A man. He was shielding his eyes from the rain, pressing his face against the glass. Open up! I know you're in there. The voice was muffled by the heavy glass and the storm, but it was unmistakable. It was Greg, her husband, the man who paid the lease on this building. the man who had shaken my hand when I signed up for classes. Panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. "It's Greg," I hissed, panic spiking in my chest. "Serena, get off! He has a key!" I tried to buck my hips, to dislodge her, but she slammed her hands down on my shoulders, pinning me with a ferocity that was terrifying. "Stop moving," she commanded, her voice a razor-sharp whisper. "If you move, the motion sensors will trigger the emergency lights. Stay still." She wasn't getting off. She was doubling down. The buzzer sounded again, long and angry. Bzzzzzt. Then, the heavy thud of a fist pounding against the tempered glass. "Serena, the candles are burning. I can see the flicker. Don't play games with me." He was right. We had blown out the lights, but the aromatic candles scattered around the perimeter were still casting a faint, dancing glow. It was enough to tell him someone was inside, but not enough to show him exactly who. Serena looked down at me. The fear was there in her eyes, flashing like quicksilver, but underneath, it was that same insane adrenaline. She slowly, deliberately, took the crystal pendant that was still resting on my stomach and wrapped the chain around her fist. She pressed the cold stone into my skin, hard, like a brand. "He's jealous," she whispered, a twisted smile touching her lips. "He thinks I'm hiding money from him. He doesn't know I'm hiding something much more valuable." This was the symbol of our secret. The crystal she used for healing was now the anchor keeping me pinned to the floor while her husband banged on the door 10 yards away. She was using the danger to heighten the sensation. She leaned down, her cheek against mine, so we were both lying flat, hidden behind the low wall of the reception desk and the decorative plants. "He's going to come in," I whispered, the blood roaring in my ears. "He has the master code. He changed it last week," she breathed back. "He thinks I don't know the new one. But if he uses the emergency override, the alarm will sound." We heard the beep 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 of a keypad being punched outside. Incorrect. A pause. Beep beep beep. "Damn it!" Greg's voice shouted. Then, the sound of keys jingling. Metal scratching against metal. He didn't need the code. He had the physical key. The lock turned with a heavy, distinct clack. The door groaned open, bringing with it the sound of the rain and the smell of wet pavement. Heavy footsteps stepped onto the wooden floor of the studio reception area. "Serena?" Greg called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "I'm coming in, and I'm not in the mood for your silent treatment." He flicked a switch. The reception lights flooded the front of the room. We were in the main hall, just beyond the archway, shrouded in shadow, but the light was creeping toward us across the floorboards. Serena put her hand over my mouth, her body tense as a coiled spring, pressing me into the floor so hard I couldn't draw a breath. He was inside. The beam of light from the reception area sliced across the dark studio floor like a physical barrier, dividing the room into a safe zone of shadow and an exposed zone of illumination. Greg's heavy boots echoed on the hardwood, clomp, 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 a jarring, violent rhythm that shattered the spiritual serenity the room was supposed to hold. "Serena!" he bellowed again, his voice bouncing off the mirrored walls. "I see your car out front. I know you're in here." We were scrambling on our hands and knees, moving like desperate animals through the darkness behind the partition of tall bamboo plants. It was a humiliating, terrifying crawl toward the only cover available, the heavy oak reception desk in the corner. Serena moved with the silent grace of a predator, her breathing controlled and rhythmic, while I was a mess of adrenaline and panic, my palms slipping on the floor, my heart hammering so loud I was certain it would give us away. We reached the space behind the desk just as Greg's shadow stretched long and distorted across the floorboards of the main hall. We curled up in the tight, cramped space between the filing cabinets and the wood paneling, pressed together so tightly that I could feel every shallow rise and fall of her chest against my arm. The scent of sandalwood incense was overpowering here, mixed with the metallic smell of wet raincoats, Greg's coat. He was standing right on the other side of the desk. I stopped breathing. My lungs burned, screaming for oxygen, but I locked my throat. Greg slammed his hand down on the countertop above our heads. The wood vibrated against my skull. "Damn it, Serena!" he muttered to himself, the anger in his voice curdling into something paranoid and ugly. "If you're hiding in the office with the books again—" He began to pace, walking away from the desk toward the administrative office at the back. This was the midpoint strike, the moment of almost absolute exposure. If he had leaned over the counter, If he had dropped his keys, if he had simply glanced down at the gap between the desk and the wall, he would have seen two tangled bodies cowering in the dark. I looked at Serena, my eyes wide with a plea to stop this madness, to stand up and explain. But Serena wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at me. In the sliver of light filtering under the desk, her face was a mask of ecstatic tension. She wasn't afraid of him finding us. She was thrilled by it. This was my choice. Laid out in the dust of the floor, I could stand up, face the angry husband, and take the fallout, or I could stay in the dark with her and become an accomplice to her twisted game. I stayed. And the price of that silence was my control. Serena shifted her weight, her knees sliding between my legs, pressing me back against the filing cabinet. It was a confined, claustrophobic intimacy that felt illicit in a way that had nothing to do with yoga. "He's checking the safe," she whispered, her mouth so close to my ear that I felt the wet heat of her lips. "He thinks I'm stealing from him." She reached out and took my hand, guiding it to her waist, forcing me to grip her. It was a confession without words, a gesture that said my marriage is a transaction, but this is real. Then, she did something that stopped my heart. With her husband rummaging through papers less than 20 feet away, she began to undo the top button of my shorts. My eyes nearly bulged out of my head. I grabbed her wrist, trying to stop her, but she shook her head, her eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. "Fear opens the chakras, Liam," she breathed. "Use it. Feel how alive you are right now." The symbol of the studio, the silence, the discipline, the control, had completely inverted. The silence wasn't for meditation anymore. It was for concealment. The discipline wasn't about holding a pose. It was about holding my nerve while she touched me in the dark. Greg's footsteps returned. He was walking back toward the main hall, toward the mat we had abandoned. "What the hell?" he grunted. "Why is the mat wet?" The blood drained from my face. He had found the spot where we had been. The sweat, the impression of bodies, it was all there. I heard the rustle of him kneeling down, inspecting the scene. "Serena?" he called out, his voice sharper, suspicious. "This isn't sweat. This is—" He didn't finish the sentence. He stood up abruptly. He was going to turn on the main floodlights. I knew it. If he hit that switch, there would be no shadows left to hide in. Serena sensed it too. The game had run its course. She pulled away from me, her expression shifting instantly from seductress to general. She reached into the pocket of her leggings and pulled out a small, hard object, a locker key on a coiled rubber band. She pressed it into my palm, curling my fingers over it. "The back exit," she whispered, pointing to the fire escape door behind the partition. "Go! Now!" "But my bag?" I started to whisper. "Leave it," she hissed. "I'll handle him. Take this. Locker 42 at the downtown station. Don't lose it." I didn't hesitate. I scrambled backward, keeping low, moving toward the rear exit while Serena stood up, smoothing her hair, preparing to walk out into the light and intercept him. I reached the heavy metal door, my hand shaking as I gripped the push bar. I looked back one last time. Serena was walking into the main hall, her voice loud and faint. "Greg? You scared me to death. I was in the bathroom." "In the dark?" Greg shouted back, unconvinced. "And whose bag is this by the door?" My heart stopped. He had seen my gym bag. I pushed the door open. The alarm didn't sound. She must have disabled it, but the sudden draft caught the heavy wind chimes hanging above the entrance. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was deafening in the quiet night. "Hey!" Greg yelled, spinning around toward the noise. "Who's there?" I didn't look back. I sprinted into the rain-slicked alleyway, clutching the locker key in my fist like a lifeline, running until my lungs burned and the studio was just a glowing box in the distance behind me. The rain didn't wash away the fear. It only made it heavier, soaking into my clothes and chilling me to the bone as I sprinted down the alleyway, away from the sanctuary that had become a trap. I didn't stop running until my lungs were burning, and the neon sign of the downtown transit station flickered above me like a dying star. I was a ghost in the crowd of late-night commuters, wet, shivering, and clutching a small brass key in my fist so tightly that the metal bit into my palm. I located the bank of lockers in the grim, fluorescent-lit underpass. Number 42. My hand shook as I inserted the key. The lock turned with a stiff, rusty resistance. I pulled the metal door open. Inside, there was no yoga mat, no incense. Just a black burner phone and a dry, oversized gray hoodie. I pulled the hoodie on over my soaked shirt, the scent of her perfume rising from the fabric, sandalwood and expensive jasmine. It was a lifeline and a leash. I picked up the phone. It rang immediately, a shrill, digital chirp that echoed in the tiled corridor. I answered without saying a word. "He found the bag," Serena's voice whispered, sounding jagged and breathless. "He found your wallet. He knows who you are, Liam." My stomach dropped through the floor. The reality of the situation crashed down on me. I wasn't just a guy who had hooked up with his yoga instructor, I was a target. "Does he know what we did?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He suspects everything," she replied. "He's going through your phone contacts. He's threatening to call the police, to call your school, to ruin you." I pulled my own smartphone out of my wet pocket. The screen lit up with a notification. It wasn't the police. It was my girlfriend, Maya. "Hey, are you okay? You're late. Mom is worried." Then, another call came through. Unknown number. It rang, an angry, demanding summons. It was him. It had to be Greg. He was using the number from my client intake form. I stood there, paralyzed between two worlds. On one side, my safe, predictable life with Maya, my recovery, my future. On the other, the dark, chaotic pull of Serena. I looked at Maya's name on the screen one last time. I muttered a silent apology that I knew wouldn't be enough. Then, I pressed the power button and held it down. The screen went black. I didn't just silence the call, I silenced my life. I slid the dead phone into the trash can next to the lockers. I turned it off. I told Serena into the burner. "I'm gone. I'm invisible." "Good," she breathed. "Meet me at the pier. Under the boardwalk. 10 minutes. When I arrived, her car was parked in the shadows, the engine idling. I slipped into the passenger seat. The heat was blasted on high. Serena wasn't the composed, mystical guru anymore. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles were white. She looked shattered. "He owns me, Liam," she said, staring out at the rain-lashed ocean. "The studio, the house, the car, even my name. I signed a prenup that leaves me on the street if I step out of line." She turned to me, her eyes filled with a raw, terrifying honesty. "I'm not a healer. I'm a fraud. I sell peace to people because I don't have any of my own. Tonight, with you, it was the first time in 10 years I felt like I was in control of my own body." She wasn't a predator. She was a prisoner. The realization shifted the ground beneath me. The danger wasn't just getting caught. It was leaving her alone in that cage. "He thinks I'm asleep," she continued, her voice trembling. "He thinks I took a sedative. But I had to see you. I had to know you were real." We sat there in the dark car, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof, the windows fogging up with our breath. The external danger was closing in. Greg was out there, angry and armed with my identity. But inside the car, the magnetic pull between us was stronger than the fear. She reached across the console, her hand finding my knee, squeezing it with a desperation that mirrored my own. "He's leaving tomorrow morning," she whispered. "He's going to his lawyers to file a restraining order against you, to destroy your reputation before you can even speak. He thinks that will scare you off." She leaned in, her eyes searching mine. "Prove him wrong. Don't run, Liam." "What are you saying?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "He'll be gone for 24 hours, she said, pressing a folded piece of paper into my hand. It was an address, not the studio, but a private residence in the hills. "Come to the house. At noon. The staff is off. The cameras will be looped. If we're going to burn for this, let's make it worth the ash." I looked at the address, then at her. I had thrown away my phone. I had ghosted my girlfriend. I was a fugitive in my own city. There was no going back to the way things were. I nodded, closing my fingers over the paper. "I'll be there," I whispered. The address Serena had pressed into my hand led to a modernist fortress of glass and steel perched precariously on the edge of the Hollywood Hills, overlooking the sprawling, smog-choked city below. It was noon, and the sun was a relentless white spotlight that offered no shadows to hide in. I walked up the steep, paved driveway, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt less like fear and more like inevitability. I was wearing the oversized gray hoodie I had retrieved from the locker, feeling like an intruder in this world of manicured hedges and silent security cameras. The house was a monument to Greg's wealth, cold, imposing, and impenetrable. I reached the massive pivot door and raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could graze the wood, the door swung open silently. Serena stood there. She wasn't the frantic, disheveled woman from the car the night before, nor was she the composed guru of the studio. She was barefoot, wearing a sheer white silk robe that floated around her like mist. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes were clear, focused, and terrifyingly calm. She didn't say hello. She didn't check the driveway for onlookers. She simply reached out, grabbed the front of my hoodie, and pulled me across the threshold, kicking the heavy door shut behind us with a definitive thunk that severed my connection to the outside world. The interior of the house was cool and smelled of expensive emptiness. We didn't speak. There were no apologies for the chaos of the previous night, no discussions about the police or the restraining order Greg was supposedly filing. Those were problems for the world below. Up here, in this vacuum of silence, there was only the unfinished business of the body. Serena led me through the cavernous living room, past the abstract art and the white leather furniture that looked like it had never been sat on, and straight into the master bedroom. It was a room dominated by a wall of windows and a massive bed. She stopped in the center of the room and turned to face me. "The staff is gone," she whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the large space. "Greg is in a meeting that will last 4 hours. We have exactly 240 minutes to find out if this is real, or if it was just the adrenaline." She dropped her robe. It pooled at her feet like water. The sight of her, unhidden, unashamed, and waiting, broke the last of my restraint. I crossed the distance between us not as a student, but as a man who had burned his life down for this single moment. When I touched her, it wasn't tentative. It was a collision. We fell onto the bed, tangling in the sheets, a frantic, desperate attempt to merge, to erase the boundaries of age, status, and fear that stood between us. The blockage she had spoken of in the studio was finally cleared, not by meditation, but by a raw, physical exorcism of desire. An hour later, the silence returned, but it was no longer heavy, it was satisfied. We lay amidst the wreckage of the bedding, the afternoon sun cutting geometric shapes across our skin. Serena was tracing the line of my jaw with her fingertip, her expression thoughtful. "He's going to come back," she said softly, staring at the ceiling. "And he's going to check the cameras. And he's going to check the logs. Let him," I said, surprised by my own boldness. "I don't care anymore." "I do," she countered, sitting up and looking at me with a sharp, calculating intelligence. "I like this house, Liam. I like the studio. I like the money. I'm not going to leave it all to live in a motel with you." It was a brutal splash of cold water, but she wasn't finished. She reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a brand new smartphone, the latest model, still in its plastic wrapping. She handed it to me. "But I'm not giving you up either. Greg thinks he won. He thinks he scared you off. We're going to let him believe that." She pressed the phone into my hand. "This is a secure line. No contracts. No paper trail. You're not my student anymore, Liam. You're my shadow. You exist only when I say you exist." I looked at the phone, then at her. She was offering me a life in the margins, a secret existence fueled by deception and high stakes. I realized then that I didn't want the light. I wanted the shade she provided. I took the phone. "When is the next lesson?" I asked. She smiled, and it was the smile of the woman who had sat on my back in the dark. "Tuesday," she whispered. "Don't be late." 1 month later, the Tuesday evening, deep stretch, class at the sanctuary was packed. The rain had returned, tapping gently against the glass, but inside, the studio was warm and smelled of lavender. I stood in the back row, just another face in the crowd, moving through the flow with practiced ease. My back didn't hurt anymore. Greg was sitting in the glass-walled office at the front of the studio, reviewing the monthly accounts. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room. He saw me. He paused, his brow furrowing as if trying to place a memory, but then he looked at Serena. She was walking through the rows of students, adjusting postures with professional grace. She caught Greg's eye through the glass and gave him a reassuring, loving smile. Greg relaxed, returning her smile, satisfied that he was the king of his castle. He looked back down at his ledger, dismissing me as just another customer. He had no idea. The class ended. "Namaste," the group chanted in unison, bowing forward. As the students began rolling up their mats and chattering, I walked toward the exit. I didn't stop to talk to the instructor. I didn't look at the office. But as I passed the reception desk, Serena was standing there, wiping down a spray bottle. She didn't look at me directly. She simply slid a small, folded piece of paper across the polished wood of the counter, right next to the sign-in sheet. I swiped it with a sleight of hand I had perfected over the last 4 weeks, slipping it into my pocket without breaking stride. I walked out into the cool night air, the adrenaline already beginning to spike in my blood. Under the harsh street lamp, I unfolded the note. It wasn't a schedule. It wasn't a love letter. It was a receipt for a hotel room at the Ritz, paid in cash, and a time, now. I looked back at the studio window. Serena was standing in the center of the room, her hands pressed together in a gesture of peace, but her eyes were burning with a dark, secret fire that was meant only for me.